Hi, this is Chris at Clever Unicorn Games and the Unicorn Collective, back with another one of our interviews. Today I have designer and publisher Ellie Dix with me. How are you doing today?
Hello, I'm really well, thank you. Nice to see you.
Tell me, Ellie, when you're not designing or making games, what is it you like to do with your spare time?
What, apart from playing games?
Yeah, is there something else that takes up your free time?
Well, I have two teenage boys and a husband. They take up quite a lot of time. But I'm a member of a glee club. So we don't call it a choir because many people can't sing very well. So um, we call it a glee club because it's full of glee and it's really about singing for fun and for charity. So there's no sort of audition or anything. So we do a lot of concerts during the year. We make thousands and thousands of pounds for charity, and it's a completely inclusive environment. In fact, apart from the world of board games and board gamers, it's the most inclusive, welcoming place that I've been. And we have a sort of subshoot of that group that does musical theatre performances, and I'm very heavily involved in those. I usually uh, stage manage and do front of house for those as well as performing in them. So yeah, that's where that's where I can be found in the drama studio if I'm not playing a game.
What would you say, and this is a hard question for most people, is your one favorite game?
Oh, it is a hard question. At the moment, purely because it's the game that both of my children like the most, and so it we because I think family games are all about, they've got to be about playing together, and your enjoyment of playing a game comes from the people that you're playing with a lot of the time. So I'll have to go for the family's favorite game, which is Terraforming Mars.
That's
Just
amazing.
it gets,
That's you don't think Terraforming Mars is going to be one that a family because it's very it's a very deep game. So
it
you
is,
you
but
always ex
this is a board game family. They've been playing games since they were tiny. They're now 17 and 13. They've been playing terraforming since the younger one was about well, 8 or 9. Um and it probably gets to the table at least once a week, sometimes twice a week, and it's often the game that gets chosen by the children. I never choose it because they choose it so often, but I love playing. So it's the family's favorite game.
No,
Yeah.
that's a really good game. Have you played Underwater Cities yet?
No, and I need to. I wanted to when we were at Essen. It was on the list of games, and every time I went to the table, there were people playing. You could never get in, and because it's quite a long game, you could stand around for an hour and still not get in. And of course, when you're at Essen, your eyes go, "Ooh, I'll go over there, and then I'll go over there," and you keep coming back, and then it doesn't happen. So I haven't played it, but I think I just might as well take the plunge.
Yeah, no, it's because to me it is. It's a lot like Terraforming Mars, and one of my friends tells me don't make that comparison. They're nothing like each other. But I think they are very similar. But the main thing is that it doesn't need you to have as many cards in your tableau. Because I know for Terraforming Mars, you can get to the point where you've got so many cards, you forget some of the actions that you can do, and you
Oh
get a
yeah.
little bit lost. Whereas that it limits you to the amount of cards. But in my, it's like it is very similar in the way that it works. So it is
Okay.
very very good game as well. So
Yeah,
just a
I
suggestion.
need to start playing that, definitely. It's on the list, the big list. Gets bigger every day, yeah.
Yeah. What kind of games or what game has first inspired you to start making games yourself?
This is a really tricky question because it's quite hard to lay a line in the sand about when I started making games myself. Um, there was the first games that I suppose that there was a great amount of time before I got to my first board game that you could play on a table, uh, that where I was still designing games and doing things beforehand. So it's quite hard to answer that question. When we were young, we used to make all sorts of variations for games that we had. And I'm talking about when I was a child. My sister and I used to make variations for games. So we'd create different cards for the Great Game of Britain. We'd make different maps for Railway Rivals. Don't know if you know Railway Rivals.
No, I don't. I'll
Oh,
have to look it up now though.
Wanna Builders Yaras in 1985 or something like that. It's one of my favourite games. It's brilliant. Um,
I'll write that
and
down actually because that
yeah,
sounds
write it
interesting.
down, Railway Rivals. And even Happy Families. I think Happy Families was probably the first time that we created our own, giant set of a game that already exists. So we would create these families that, with second cousin 3 times removed, and you'd have to like 20 different family members you had to get, great uncle, whatever. And yeah, and with I don't know how many different families. But when when I was teaching, I was creating my own games as well. So but they weren't board games. So it's a really difficult question to answer about which game inspired me, because I think it's accumulation of all sorts of different kinds of experience. But the first time I remember creating stuff was from Happy Families, so it was quite early on.
Uh, when coming up with a new game, so well, say you've already got the idea. When it comes to taking that idea to the next level, where do you start? Where do you go to first?
It depends where the idea started, I think. Sometimes an idea comes to you from a name, like the name just pops into your mind, which is quite random, and you think, oh, that just looks so good on a box. Everybody be talking about this game because the name's so good. And then you have to think about the game. But usually it comes from a mechanism. So a mechanic. So a kind of a mechanic pops into your mind. Oh, that would work really well in that kind of way, and that comes to me usually before any kind of theme. And so for me, if I've got an idea of a mechanic I want to use, and I've thought through this mechanic, but it hasn't yet got a theme. The next stage is really to tie that, to think, okay, really carefully, what does this mechanic lend itself to? And because the theme is not predefined in my mind, and it could be anything, I'm kind of quite open. So I'm thinking quite laterally, I suppose, about what kinds of situations this mechanic could be used in. Because I create games for families, and I think by and large, children particularly respond better to games that are themed and more strongly themed than games that are just sort of more abstract and themeless. So even though it's coming from a mechanic, I'm thinking all the time about, where does this theme take me? And then I might have like 10 different ideas for this one particular mechanic, and it could be, set in, some farm or other, but then, that's been done quite a lot. Or maybe it's a space station, or maybe it's a den building thing, or maybe it's something else, or I don't know, all sorts of different things. So yeah, I've been working on this game, which is nowhere near ready. It's certainly at the early stages of development, which is a bag building game. And I just got this idea about the different coloured cubes you could draw out of the bag, and what one of those cubes would allow you to do. So it was a very specific idea, which is now involving a rondelle, and it's sort of a rubbish collection game. It's a bit weird. It might change again.
I tell you, you and me are in the minority, it would seem, from the interviews I've done so far, and that I am the same. I start with mechanics and then work from there, and then put a theme that matches the mechanics together with it. Most designers go with the theme first, which I found. From these interviews, most of them go with theme and then find mechanics to fit the theme. So,
Well,
but
I have gone from theme to mechanic, but um, I find that much harder because it's not a game yet. It's just a theme. And of course, if you're starting with the mechanic, that's the crux of the game. For me, the mechanics got to be right, and the mechanics are what interesting and makes the game interesting. And you might have I've created a game called Throw Down Your Coats, and it's got this movement mechanic in it where you're essentially piggybacking a lot across a line of, when you were little and you had to do obstacle races, and you might have 2 sacks, and you lay one down in front of you and you stand on it, and then you pick up the one from behind you and you lay it in front and you stand on that, and you keep going like that, right? It's like that, but you start with it's the idea is it's peasants who are throwing down your coats to walk on, and this and that's how you move around the board, and you're restricted by the number of things that you've got to walk on, and as you go through the game you're gaining influence and followers, and then you get more coats that you can walk on, you can go further, and that mechanic was the idea behind the whole game. Then what happened was I set it and I put it in this sort of uh, feudal, sort of English at the time of the kind of Black Death and stuff, where the lords were, there's a serf system, and and then I started adding all the other things in which would fit the theme. And when I presented it to people in playtesting, well, this one friend of mine, David Brain, who's the designer of Key Market, amongst other things, he said, "Oh, you've got to get rid of everything except this movement mechanic, which is brilliant. You've got to get rid of everything." And I just put it in as kind of on top of the theme, and I didn't need it. So actually, I think when you've got a really exciting mechanic, your whole game can center around that one thing. If there's enough interest in that.
Yeah,
So yeah, I do it. I do it generally that way. But I create these things called puzzle boxes, which are themed boxes of board games and puzzles, and they've all got a big box and a small box game in them, and other things, other games and stuff. But they've all got this sort of mint tin game and then a big box game, and they are linked by theme. So if I've got a big box game or a small box game of a certain theme, I will be looking to link it, looking to create another game that links it in some way. So I am sort of thinking about that as I'm creating games, but still generally it comes from a mechanic.
great answer. I like that.
Thanks.
You've taken games from your mind all the way to market now, so you've got them out to gamers. In that process, has there
Yeah.
ever been a barrier or hurdle that you've hit and it stopped you dead and you've thought, I'm stuck now, I don't know where to go? And then how did you overcome that? And it can be either designing or the manufacturing or any part of the process.
I think I've been very naive because my background is in education and in teaching and then running an education company. So in some ways, I'm very green in terms of the board game industry. And that, I think, has been largely an advantage, but sometimes it feels like a disadvantage. So when it comes to manufacturing, I didn't know anything about manufacturing games, nothing at all, before I decided I was just about to embark upon this thing. And of course, after some initial investigations, I discovered that you've got to have a kind of minimum order of 1,000 or 1,500, and of course it gets more cost effective the more that you get. But that is quite a lot of games if you're just starting out and you're not yet you don't know how this is going to fly yet. So I wanted to do much smaller print runs because I wanted to develop my range. I wanted to do much smaller print runs. And so I essentially forgot about the board game manufacturers and started working out how I could do it in a different way. So I have, I know that you can see me, hang on. So I have got these boxes that have, so I got boxes with the company name debossed on it that I could use for all the big box games. And I decided I'm going to make all the big box games the same size, so they're all going to use this box. And then I get sleeves printed, which are much more cost effective. So this is the expensive thing, but this can be used for any of the big box games. And then I get the sleeve done, and it looks lovely. It's still got full box art on, and the box is nice. It's debossed, but it looks very different from the other games. So I was using ideas really to make small print runs cost effective, and that worked quite well. I suppose from a design point of view, I was lucky because I found Playtest UK early on, and I decided early on that it was important that I shared the games outside my friends and family. and that's the best decision that I made. That, I started when I finished work and I started doing this seriously. In fact, I started going before I finished work. But when I was designing seriously, it's one of the first things I did. So I think the first time I took a game to the playtesting group, I'd only been working on it for a week, and it was the best thing I'd done. I'm so pleased I didn't sit at home working on it for another 2 months, which I think is a trap that a lot of new game designers fall into.
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant answer because yeah, you can't really. I mean, I love my friends and family, but you can't trust them with constructive criticism.
No,
So the best thing to do is yeah, get out to if you can get to shows, get to shows. Or now, especially with the pandemic forcing people online, I think a lot of people are coming to the realization that things like Tabletop Simulator,
no.
Tabletopia are just amazing for playtesting because it's
They
free to put
are.
it on there, and then you
But
can just
we're still having play testing sessions on Zoom, and everybody's getting creative about the kinds of games you can play on Zoom. We're doing lots of roll and writes. We're doing lots of games where one person has a deck of cards and they just show you stuff, and you don't. It doesn't require, it's information that everybody's got rather than any hands. So I think we're getting more creative, but I think that there's a real danger, and it's not necessarily perfectionism, but when you're designing a game, you may know that it's not how you want it, and that knowledge that it's not quite right yet is enough to keep lots of people from taking it and putting it out there, and just to playtesting sessions. And of course, the things that you may be hung up on, the balance, or certain cards that don't work brilliantly, or that you haven't got one thing, or you haven't decided how the game ends or something, might not matter to the playtesting group. And actually what might happen is the stuff you've been working on and thought was quite good is bombing, and one tiny thing that you haven't even really thought about, people are going, that's brilliant. And then you have to pivot and focus on the thing that people, that is clearly the true essence of the game. And the more time you invest up until that point where you start getting things to playtesting, the more disheartening that can be. So yeah, I think it's best to not dwell on the fact that it's not a perfect game when you take it. Just get it out there, and yeah, don't bother asking the friends and family.
have you ever played a game and you don't have to name it that you didn't like? And what was the mechanic, the theme, or what was it about that game that put you off it?
Yeah, I've played lots of games I don't like. Sometimes it's because the design is weak, um, and they haven't thought of something which is seemingly obvious, like a first player advantage that just means that nobody else that's not in first player, that's not the first player, will never be able to win. So there's a game that's quite recently out, which I won't name, but yeah, that there's no way of changing the turn order, and yet the first player has the absolute advantage through the whole game. Um, then there, then I suppose there are some games that I don't enjoy that are very much about player elimination. I'm not that keen on that because I'm coming from I usually play with the family, right? With my family, with my extended family, my nieces and nephews, my mum. We're playing multi-generation, and we're choosing to play together because we want to play together. And as soon as you've got player elimination, someone can be out, and they can be out for quite a long time, and that forces that person to either go away or to disconnect from the game, and they're looking at their phone and they're doing things that you don't really want them to be doing. And it's not about that. Game playing shouldn't be about that. So I don't like that, but also I'm not a fan of take that. I am if the game is all about that, and it's done in a kind of fun way. And in fact, it's the one thing about terraforming Mars which really annoys me. It doesn't need the take that elements of stealing other people's plants
Yeah,
off them. It's
eating their
totally
animals. Your
unnecessary.
carnivores eating their animals.
Yeah, because it takes ages to build up the engine, and they could have done that game without any take that at all in, and it would have been a better game in my opinion. Because that's the one time in the game where I feel, and it's not my fault. It's not my fault.
Um, Why do you make games? What is it that drives you to make games?
Well, first and foremost, I love playing them, and it's without a doubt the thing that I would, in any moment in the day, if I haven't got something else to do, that is what I'd be choosing to do. Um, Secondly, and this is, I suppose, what really drives me to make them rather than just play them, is that I have over the years of having my children and meeting the friends of their friends and their friends' parents, I have realised that what we have in our family with being very board game centred is not as normal as it would be nice if it was. It would be great if more families were playing more board games. And I get the parents of my children's friends coming to me and saying, how do you how do you get this? How do you do this? That my kids will go to their friends' houses armed with board games, and their friends will come back from our house saying, "We need to get this board game." And maybe those children are quite video game centered, and my son Alfie will go to his friend's house, and the whole family will end up sitting around playing a board game, and they're on the phone to me going, "We haven't played a board game in ages. This is brilliant." And so I actually started by writing a book for parents, um, to help. It's a sort of how-to guide, how to get into board games. I'll just show you the board game family. Reclaim your children from the screen. So
That's a great tagline.
thanks. Yeah. And it's all about it's really a guide for parents that don't play many games as a family, but also it's I've Suzanne Sheldon, for example, has read it and started tweeting about it, and she said it's brilliant for families that do play games as well. So that's nice. And lots of other people have said it's also brilliant for people who don't have families who want to play games. But so that's nice as well. But it's designed for families that don't play many games to try and get them into board gaming. And it breaks down in lots of different steps about how you can get to the table. I used to run a behavior management company training teachers how to manage behavior. And so there's a lot in there about how you manage behavior around the table, how you deal with, kind of messy outbursts and table flipping, or how you avoid getting to that point in the first place. And of course, a lot of it is to do with the kinds of games. So when I started, really thinking about what games are good for families, what games don't have a lot of sitting around, because kids are really good with complex stuff. I mean, you can play Terraforming Mars with an 8-year-old quite easily. An 8-year-old can pretty much do any game. Complexity wise, they can pretty much learn any game. But what they can't do is sit around for ages waiting for you to teach them. They can't sit there for a long time in between turns. They don't want to do that. It gets very dull. And they can't deal with things like obviously losing for long periods of time. So I was looking for games that suit family play, so are as interesting for parents as they are for children, are fairly quick or simultaneous, quick turns, not necessarily quick plays, but quick turns or simultaneous play. And as I was thinking about this and writing the book, I was having so many thoughts about, well, I'm going to make that game, and I'm going to make that game, and I'm going to make that game. So it's really come from a desire to create better games for families to play together that the adults and the children will both enjoy.
How has the state of the world at present affected how you design and make games, if it has?
Well, it has, because of what I mentioned earlier in terms of our playtesting switching from, because I go every week. We meet on Fridays in London, and normally we meet all day on Friday in London, and now we have switched that to this online playtesting. And we're meeting on Zoom. And whereas a lot of the playtesting that's happening online is Tabletop Simulator and Tabletopia and things like that, we've retained our not face to face, but Zoom calls, and we only play games that you can play via Zoom and that don't take us out into Tabletop Simulator or something. So we are therefore designing games that suit that medium. So whereas normally I'd be focusing on, components that you share around a table and cards and all sorts of things like that, I'm not at the moment. I'm very much focusing on roll and write games, which are easy to play online, and things with cards that one person can show. So yeah, so that's it has changed, and I was doing those things anyway. I was doing, I really like roll and writes anyway. I've got these giant, because a lot of what I do is about making games more accessible for families that aren't playing yet. So I'm trying to find I'm producing games in different formats. So I've got these giant roll and write games on A3 desk pads, and there's one game on one side and one game on the other side of each thing. And then I do these games on coasters, cardboard coasters, and they're all over the desk right now. So you've got 6 different coasters, and each coaster has got the game on one side and the rules on the reverse. And these are brilliant to play on Zoom. Each one of them can be played on Zoom, and they're all completely different games. So I've kind of fast tracked things like this, which are fairly low cost for families. So this you can buy in bulk. So you've got board game cafes and schools and things buying them in bulk, but they come in this sort of little pack. And this is a travel pack of coaster games. There's 6 games in here, and they're not crap games. They're not games that you would expect to be on a coaster. They're good games. They're actually much meatier than you might expect them to be.
And I will say really well produced by the look of it as well. They look really nice.
Right.
So what would you say, or what advice would you give, one piece of advice to somebody with an idea who wants to get into board games and designing board games?
Well, apart from playtest loads,
Yeah, that's a good one.
that's the one piece of advice. Playtest loads, and go with an open mind to playtesting sessions, and don't be afraid to get rid of a lot of the stuff that inspired the game in the first place. And I think that's probably quite common advice. But the reason it's common advice is because it's really important. You might have had the brilliant idea for a game, and you take it and you've put a load of other things around it, and then actually it's not the brilliant idea for a game that is the thing that really sings. And you might have to get rid of that brilliant idea to make that one brilliant thing to make the rest of the game work properly. And it's about having the courage to do that, really, and just go, yep, going to do that, and just create as many different games as you can. Just give yourself. So when I decided I was going to start designing properly and like totally bin my old career and do this full time, I gave myself a challenge to create a new game every day for a fortnight, and it was brilliant. And it didn't mean I didn't have to get an all singing, all dancing, printed prototype ready in a day. I was coming up with ideas, which got me into practice of how I would come up with ideas. I was, writing notes and creating prototypes on the back of a cereal packet and testing them out and just trying out ideas, and then putting that to one side and then trying something totally different the next day. And those kinds of creative exercises help you work out how you get inspiration yourself. And I think a lot of people probably come into board game design because they've got one idea for one game. And it's so much better if you can have lots of ideas for lots of games, because most of the games you create won't be any good. So if you've found ways to be creative and get lots of ideas, then some of them are going to stick.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming and speaking to me today, Ellie. This has been brilliant.
It's been lovely. I've really enjoyed it.
Me too.